Now, you know, early in the early days when they first started staining these cells and looking at them under a microscope, they thought that agranulocytes did not have any granules at all. But later on, that was proven wrong. The granules are just very, very small in comparison to that of the granulocytes. Divide these. Okay. So now the first the first agranulocyte I want to talk about is a lymphocyte. Okay. Lymphocytes, these are extremely easy to spot under a microscope because they have a very large nucleus. Okay, their nucleus is extremely large. Their nucleus takes up almost the entire cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, it's so big. All right, now that should tell you something because you remember the function of DNA. The function of DNA, the major role of it is it's a code to make proteins. Okay, it helps regulate the cell cycle. How cells divide and all that stuff. Okay, so as a result, what happens when we're exposed to a specific antigen, these white blood cells, these lymphocytes, they're designed to divide like crazy. Okay, these divide and divide and divide and make more and more and more copies. So the more of these white blood cells we have, the better off we are when it comes to fighting a foreign invader. Okay, so and then basically, like I said, depending on if they're a T or a B cell, okay, they'll divide and form more than what we started out with to begin with. And then they'll form different types of T and B cells, which we'll talk about again later on when it comes to the immune response. Okay, and again, these do actually have some very fine granules in the cytoplasm, but again, like I said, they're not significant enough to really mention. Okay, so that's lymphocytes. They just have a very large, their nucleus is quite conspicuous. Okay, and like I said, these make up 20 to 40% of the circulating white blood cells that you find in the blood. And last but not least are monocytes. Okay, monocytes, they have a very large horseshoe-shaped nucleus. Okay, their nucleus is shaped like a horseshoe, fairly easy to see. Again, you may see some fine granules in the cytoplasm. Okay, now basically what a monocyte is, it's a circulating phagocyte. Okay, monocytes, again, these are phagocytes that are circulating around in the blood, and again, they're trying to go somewhere. Okay, because eventually these will be stored in different tissues throughout the body, and they take on different physical characteristics, and we name them differently depending on the tissues you find them in. In skin, we call them dendritic cells. Okay, in the brain, we call them microglia. In connective tissues, we call them macrophages. In the liver, we call them Kupffer cells. Okay, they all do the same thing. Okay, they all do the exact same thing. They're phagocytes, but after they migrate into the tissues, like I said, physically, morphologically, they will look different just because, like I said, they adapt to the environment that they're now, of the tissue environment that they're now kind of housed in. Okay, but this is what they're going to look like before they get into the tissue, into whatever tissue it is they're trying to migrate in. Okay, the big horseshoe-shaped nucleus. All right, and that's basically, your white blood cells, how you tell them apart and what they look like. All right. Now, again, like which I mentioned earlier that I kind of brought up this topic when I was talking about lymphocytes, is that when you do get sick, your white blood cell count will go up. Okay, your white blood cell count will rise, and that's a good thing. Okay, you want more white blood cells so you can fight off an infection. Okay, so if you take a blood sample out of somebody and you do an account, and all of a sudden their total white blood cell count is 15,000 cells per microliter, that's probably going to indicate their body's trying to fight something. Okay, that's going to indicate they're trying to fight something. But the question is, how do you know what they're fighting? One, obviously they may come in with clinical signs and symptoms, but two, a really good way to do it again is to do the differential count. Okay, someone comes in and they're running a fever, maybe they've got some stomach, they're complaining of pain in their abdomen. Okay, you're going to think, okay, maybe they've got some kind of infection in their stomach, but what exactly are they fighting? And let's say you do this, and all of a sudden you see their eosinophil count is up to 10%. That might mean they ate some bad sushi. Okay, which is, again, that's just an expression, and probably be more accurate if we say they ate some bad pork. Okay, and then all of a sudden they have a worm in their, and then you might think, okay, they've got a worm in their GI tract, maybe they're trying to fight that off. Now we can investigate further in this direction. So that's why it's important to understand the differential count. That's why we don't just do a total white blood cell count. We do a differential as well. Okay. And again, the last thing I just want to mention real briefly is that these white blood cells, again, they come from, just like your erythrocytes and platelets, they are designed in your bone marrow, red bone marrow to be specific, the hemopoietic tissue, and we call them, we call this process, leukopoiesis. And again, there's mainly, again, these come from stem cells, okay? We'll just say, just to keep it real basic for the sake of discussion, that these come from stem cells in your red bone marrow. Now again, how do you get one kind of blank, boring looking stem cell to turn into a specific neutrophil or a specific monocyte? Okay, now again, it comes down to chemical messages, what you expose these stem cells to. Okay, and in this situation, the major class of chemical, there's others that are involved, like interleukins is one class that's involved, but what I want to mention is CSFs, colony stimulating factors. Okay, now basically we name the colony stimulating factors, the specific type for what type of cell it's going to make this stem cell differentiate into. That probably sounded confusing. Well, let's say for example, we want to convert this into a monocyte. We'll call it monocyte colony stimulating factor, or granulocyte colony stimulating factor, or for just in general for the granulocytes, we can call it eosinophilic colony stimulating factor. Get the picture, okay? And that's kind of where these white blood cells come from, okay? These stem cells that are found in your blood, that are found in your bloodstream, in your red bone marrow, the hemopoietic tissue, okay? So that's kind of the white blood cells in a nutshell. I forgot to mention too. We talked about what happens when you have a high count. What do you think it would indicate if your white blood cells drop too low? Okay, if your white blood cell count dropped below, let's say 5,000, let's say it dropped down to 2,000 or 3,000, that would indicate that there's something wrong with your bone marrow. That would indicate that there's something wrong. You're not producing these white blood cells like you're normally supposed to. Okay, for example, exposure to high levels of radiation can do this. Okay. People that are exposed to nuclear radiation, like survivors of the atomic bombs, or people that work in a nuclear power plant where there's a meltdown of some sort, okay, or people that work in labs that use radiation but don't regulate it very well. Okay, granted, in major labs nowadays you don't see that, but you may see some back alley scientists trying to do crazy things like that. Okay, but if we drop our white blood cell count below 5,000, that's going to say we have a hard time fighting infections. That's going to be a problem. Okay, because remember, your white blood cells are your immune system. They're your defense against foreign pathogens. Okay, if your defense system starts to weaken, then you're going to be more susceptible to infections and foreign invaders, and it'll be easier to die as a result from even some of the most basic infections. Okay, so that's basically white blood cells in a nutshell. Hope this helps. Again, if you have any questions, contact me and enjoy your weekend.